Hello, everyone. So, this is my 2020 presidential election prediction between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. So, I've been kind of inspired by a couple political uh, forecasters on YouTube, such as Stellar Spark and Let's Talk Elections. So, I thought I'd give my opinion out on the internet. So, without further ado, let's get into the prediction. So, California, Oregon, and Washington are safe Democratic states, including Hawaii, New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, D.C., uh, Illinois. Minnesota is probably safe for Sanders. Yes, it only voted for Trump by 2% in 2016, but that was a little bit of an outlier. It's voted for every single Democrat since 1976, and plus with Bernie's appeal to Rust Belt voters, which I'm going to talk about later, it's likely a safe Democratic state. If we go back to New Mexico, safely Democratic, mainly because it used to be a swing state in the early 2000s, but especially with Trump's candidacy and his comments against Hispanic voters, it doesn't look good for him. If you look at the other states, Bernie's probably going to carry Maine. We could talk about the second congressional district, but he'll probably carry Maine because he has a really good appeal to rural voters, and plus he's in Vermont, so he has a good geographical appeal in New England. That's probably similar. Also, another similar Hillary Clinton state from 2016. I'm gonna leave as toss-ups right now: Nevada and Colorado, and Virginia. We'll talk about that later, but I'm going to say they're competitive 2020 states. Let's go to the Republican states. Safe states: Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, Kansas. Well, we could probably talk about Kansas later, but it's likely safe for Trump. Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, South Carolina, Kentucky, West Virginia. I'm probably going to able to talk about that, but it's likely safe for Trump by how such a big of a margin he got in 2016. But when I'm going to be talking more about later on Bernie's white working class appeal, he could lower the margins in West Virginia, but since there's such a huge margin for Trump in 2016, it's probably still safe for him. He probably has enough of a cushion to keep a lead. Some competitive states from 2016, where we'll talk about North Carolina, we'll keep that toss up. Georgia, Florida, the perennial battleground, Arizona. We'll talk about Texas. Probably still likely to vote for Trump, but we'll keep it as competitive for now. Um, Ohio, Iowa. They're pretty. They've been battlegrounds in the 21st century. They did vote for a huge margin, over 9 points, for Donald Trump in 2016, but that's because Hillary Clinton was such a bad candidate to appeal for these Rust Belt voters, and that's a big major factor that Bernie has that will help him win the election. So we'll talk about that later. But those will be competitive in 2020. Obviously, the whole Rust Belt, which narrowly voted for Trump in 2016, will be competitive. And the whole state of Nebraska will definitely vote for Donald Trump, except for the second congressional district. Only voted for him 2% in 2016 and voted for Barack Obama in 2008. So we'll discuss that. Um, Alaska, sorry, safe for Donald Trump. All right, then New Hampshire will be competitive. Second district of Maine will be competitive. I want to talk about Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Missouri, and Indiana. So I can see these potentially being battleground states. I think Sanders will try to campaign here, but with Trump's approval rating around 42-43%, if his approval rating gets below 40%, I could see these states becoming more competitive, especially because of Bernie Sanders, his message against TPP, and his a little bit more protectionist views on free trade. really help him in the Rust Belt. He has a really good white working class appeal. He won those states in the primary against Hillary Clinton in the Rust Belt, and he is much. That's something that Hillary Clinton lacked, of keeping those Obama Democrats, or it used to be back in the day called Reagan Democrats, that voted for the Democrats, because essentially their main issue is economic issues, and with a lot of their jobs and factory jobs in the Rust Belt deteriorating, they're looking for a candidate that they can see for the working class, for the people, that they can see that will help, that's pro union, that will help them in the region. So those are going to be competitive states. So those kind of leach in to states like North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Missouri, and Indiana. Montana only voted for John McCain by 2% in 08. North Dakota and South Dakota were considered toss-ups by Election Day 2008, but they did vote for John McCain by a good margin. Missouri in 2008 only narrowly voted for John McCain by 0.3%, and Indiana did vote for Barack Obama in 2008. So these states, I believe, will be potentially competitive if there's a big blowout for Sanders. But right now, because Indiana is Mike Pence's home state, which is Donald Trump's running mate, I don't really see Indiana going. Really, Missouri has really gone away from the Democrats since the beginning of the 21st century. Went by a big margin for Trump, so probably Trump will still narrowly carry it. Carry it. Excuse me. North and South Dakota, they're a little bit interesting because they vote for Democrats like Heidi Heitkamp, because they look for very specific and unique candidates they vote for. They're not really 100% vote Republican, but generally when it comes to the default, they vote for the Republican candidate. Probably more competitive, but by the big margins Trump had in 2016, likely probably still carry them. Montana, I see probably could be a big potential, but for Sanders, because he does well with rural voters, but I'm gonna have to say with Trump's approval rating, but still potentially could rise. I'm gonna say Montana votes for Donald Trump. Okay, so now we see 200 electoral votes for Sanders, 125 for Trump. If you look at the state of, really, one more state I said was competitive, probably Texas will vote for Donald Trump. It was only voted for 9%, actually lower margin than Ohio and Iowa, in 2016. But Sanders doesn't really have the greatest appeal to get huge turnout among minority voters. He will do well among minority voters, like any Democrat would in the general election, but he wouldn't excite them enough to probably win Texas. It will probably be competitive, depending on where Trump's approval rating is in 2020, and how good of a campaign Sanders run, how good of a ground game he has. But most likely Texas, with its changing demographics, will become more of a swing state by the mid 2020s. But right now, 2020s will still probably a leaning Republican state. So now this will be the competitive. These are really going to be really competitive states where most the candidates are going to spend most of their time in 2020. Let's look at the look here. So this is the polling data so far for 2020 between Sanders and Trump. And you see that he has right now every poll he's leading, except for the USA Today poll back in February. So right now he's about an average of about 10.4%. So likely Sanders is considered one of the most popular politicians in the country, against probably arguably one of the most controversial and unpopular presidents in history. So he's likely to win the popular vote. But let's look at the electoral college is what matters. So Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, I see them voting for Bernie Sanders. They voted narrowly they voted extremely narrowly for Donald Trump in 2016. Michigan 0.22%, 0.72%, 0.76%, and with the approval rating of these states much lower than the nation in these Rust Belt states, and considering that Trump wins by such a narrow margin, and that Bernie Sanders still has a pretty much better Rust Belt appeal, white working class appeal than Hillary Clinton had, I see those three states going easily for Donald Trump in, Bernie Sanders in 2016 and 2020. Excuse me. We go to New Hampshire. Safe, probably likely for Bernie Sanders because it's his neighboring home state. He did extremely well, a little bit better than expected in the 2016 primary against Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton had won the primary in 2008 against Barack Obama, so he got over 60% in New Hampshire. So he's likely to win that state by a pretty considerable margin. It's probably the same reasoning because he's a New Englander. He'll carry the 2nd Congressional District in Maine. Yes, Trump won that by a big margin, by around 9%. That was a big swing. But then again, it was Hillary Clinton such a bad presidential candidate, and when Bernie's appealed to rural voters, he's likely to take that district. We come out to the rest of the map. Virginia is becoming more of a Democratic state in the 2020s. It's going to probably become a blue state. I could see the state legislature flipping to the Democrats in 2018 in Virginia, with the Northern Virginia suburbs growing and more minority voters and younger voters coming out. I see Virginia easily going for Bernie Sanders. Colorado, and most likely Nevada. Those are Hillary Clinton states, especially in those that have a lot of independent libertarian leaning voters, which Sanders can do well in, much better than Hillary Clinton has. So he's likely more to increase his margins than over Hillary Clinton in those states. All right. So now these are pure. So as we can see now, 279 for Bernie Sanders, 163 for Trump. He's won the presidency. So now we look at the rest of these states. So these, I believe, are the rest of these states. I believe are pure toss-ups. I could see them going really either way in 2020, depending on how popular Donald Trump is and how effective the rest of his presidency is. If we look, first thing I want to give is Georgia for Donald Trump. I believe Sanders will be competitive, but then again, like I said before, he had trouble in the Democratic primary winning over black voters in the South. And I believe when it comes to the general election, he's not going to have prompt massive turnout among the African American community. And if we look at some of the polling, this was Trump versus Sanders in 2016. You could see this Democratic poll, PPP. Trump has an 8-point lead. Sanders did have a 5-point lead in one poll, but likely I could see Georgia voting for Donald Trump. And also I think Bernie Sanders is going to spend a lot of time in the Rust Belt, mostly because in 2016 those were really unexpected to vote for Trump. So I think he's going to be more cautious in his election strategy. He's going to campaign a lot in the Rust Belt. The next state I'm going to call is the state of Florida. Why am I calling the state of Florida? So I think if we look Trump versus Sanders, the polling from 2016, Sanders did have a small lead, but I think what really is going to make Florida, I think, really tip in Sanders' direction is a lot in the Parkland shooting and Hurricane Irma, and a lot in the Paris Climate Agreement, especially those issues, which are much more, Sanders has a much more liberal stance, obviously, on those types of issues, and with those issues affecting Florida in the past couple of years, and the Trump administration kind of not being associated towards those solutions, with Trump withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement, and with a lot of Republicans getting criticism for not supporting gun control after the Parkland shooting. I feel like Florida, I think any Democratic candidate could do potentially very well here. However, one thing going against historically in the past recent elections. Yeah, Florida's a battleground, but it tends the best bet for Florida is to say that it's going to vote for the incumbent. If you look, George W. Bush, he was the incumbent. It was a battleground state, but he won it in 2004. In 2012, Barack Obama won as the incumbent. Um, Bill Clinton lost it in 92, but as the incumbent, he won it in 96. So Florida, but because of those factors I mentioned, I think Bernie's gonna win in Florida. If you look at these rest of these states now, I believe Iowa is gonna vote for the Democratic candidate for Bernie Sanders. This used to be, the state voted for Michael Dukakis in '88. Bernie Sanders. This had a big margin for Obama both in '08 and 2012. This is going to Bernie's with his appeal to rural voters. There's a little bit of a Rust Belt state in the Rust Belt area, and with working white, there's a lot of good unions and white working and history in that area from the progressive era. I think Bernie's going to carry Iowa. Also, if you want to look at the polling from 2016, Bernie had a big lead in the polling average, 9 points. So likely I could see the state of Iowa voting for Bernie Sanders. Even though it voted by 9+ points for Trump, I think it's going to vote for Bernie Sanders. In the state of Ohio, I also see that voting for Bernie Sanders. I could see how Trump could win this state, especially with his tariffs and blocking TPP. You could argue that was what you asked for. For the little guy, for the working class in Ohio. But I think Bernie Sanders, he can still appeal to that demographic, and he could argue, or I'm tougher on immigration issues, not immigration issues, sorry, free on trade issues. So Ohio will be really competitive, but I think Bernie Sanders is going to win it in the end. If you look at the polling averages, Bernie Sanders had 5 point lead, 9 points, 2 points, and 4 points in the past polls. So I think Bernie Sanders would probably carry it by a margin. Obama carried it in 2012, not an '08 margin, but probably 3 to 5 points. Bernie Sanders will carry Ohio. Okay. So North Carolina and Arizona. So Arizona, a lot of political pundits didn't really expect that Hillary Clinton would carry in 2016, but North Carolina was a lot. People were saying would vote for Hillary Clinton, but ended up voting for Donald Trump. And what actually was interesting is that Arizona voted for Donald Trump by a smaller margin than North Carolina did in 2016. So if you wanna look at that. Yeah, North Carolina voted by 3.66%, Arizona only 3.55%. And I think, like I said before, Bernie Sanders doesn't have really the greatest appeal to minority voters, but I think he could do better than Latino voters, than black voters in Georgia. So I think Bernie Sanders is going to carry it, because not mainly because of himself, but I think a lot of Democrats are going to be competitive here, because especially recently with Trump and the issue regarding children being separated from their families at the border. You could talk about the DACA issue being rescinded by President Trump, and obviously the same rhetoric that Trump had in 2016 is going to carry over. So I don't think Bernie Sanders himself. I think a lot of the external factors, politically and geopolitically, will make Arizona vote for Sanders rather than Sanders appeal himself. North Carolina, I think, is going to vote for Bernie Sanders. Voted for Barack Obama in 2008. I think it was going to go vote for Bernie Sanders again. Mainly because, again, yes, there's minority voters that he needs to turn out in North Carolina. But if you look at the Democratic primary in 2016, he got over 40% in the state, while in other southern states like South Carolina, Georgia, he barely got 25-30%. So he has potential to do well in North Carolina because again a Democrat really needs to do well with white working class voters in the state. So I think he's gonna narrowly carry North Carolina by 3 points, 3 points. Probably Arizona by 1 to 2 points. He'll carry it. Florida, I think Bernie's gonna carry it um, by a larger margin than Barack Obama won in 2012, which is 0.9%, but a little bit less than he won by the margin that Obama won it in 2008. So the Nebraska second congressional district, just because Bernie does well with rural voters, um, and the Nebraska second congressional district voted for Barack Obama in 2008. It only voted for Donald Trump by 2% in 2016. So I think it's going to vote for Bernie Sanders. So 359 electoral votes for Bernie Sanders and 179 electoral votes for Donald Trump. I could see this happening, but I could easily see if Trump's approval rating creeps up, or several other factors that could happen. Maybe to Sanders' campaign, Arizona. I could see North Carolina, Florida, Ohio, and Iowa flipping. But I mainly see Trump losing to Sanders because he's going to flip over Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, which was considered Hillary Clinton's firewall in 2016. Is going to have that 200, and he's going to hold the Clinton stage, which will keep him at 279 electoral votes. So it's going to really be hard for Trump to recover past that margin. So yeah, that's how I see the election going to go. In terms of the popular vote that we had taken a look at before, right now he has about a 10-point spread in the polls. There's obviously some polls that have been much higher, around 16 points. We saw that a lot in 2016. I see. So I do see Sanders winning by double digits. Not by 15, 16 points. I think by Trump campaigning is going to get slight popularity, and there'll be a 2 or 3%, obviously that shy Trump voter. I think could potentially give a couple points to Trump. So I think Sanders will win at the very most 15 points, but I see it likely keeping 10, probably 10 points. Could be 11 or 12, but much closer to 10 or 11 points. I see this. So you might be wondering, 359 electoral votes has less electoral votes that Barack Obama got in 2008. But Barack Obama had gotten a much smaller margin than that 10 or 11 point margin I'm predicting for in 2020. That's mainly because Barack Obama only carried the nation by the popular vote by around 7. I think Bernie's gonna win by 10, even though he's gonna get slightly less electoral votes, because he's gonna run up the margin in these Democratic states, these safe Democratic states, because he's gonna excite them as much, or as he's gonna outperform Obama's excitement for these base Democratic voters in all these states, with his progressive message, and I think he could really close the gap in like these smaller Republican states. He's not going to win them, but he's going to close the margin a little bit because of his appeal to rural and independent voters. And that's how I think the popular vote is going to match that electoral figure I'm going to give him. But obviously, this could change. I could see this really changing dramatically in the next couple of months, especially after the midterm election is going to give us a strong indication of how 2020 is going to go. So if you guys have any suggestions, any disagree with any of the states on the map, let me know in the comments. If you want to let me know, this is the first time I'm doing a video, any suggestions on how to do a video, whether regarding the recording or anything, just let me know. Thanks for watching. Please consider watching some of my other videos, my new predictions. The future, I'm probably gonna do some other Democratic matchups. Probably do some 2018 midterm predictions. So stay tuned, and if you want to see those videos. So all right, thank you guys. Have a good day.